It was a busy Thursday morning at the bustling Los Angeles International Airport. The air was filled with the hum of voices, the sound of rolling suitcases, and the faint beep of security scanners. Travelers, excited for their trips, hurried through the terminal, eager to board their flights. Some looked weary after long layovers, while others beamed with the thrill of heading to a new adventure. The bright sunlight filtered through the towering glass windows, casting a warm glow over the crowded hallways. Outside, the California sky was clear, offering a perfect start to the day. In the midst of this energetic chaos, a figure emerged, someone who was instantly recognizable even amidst the crowd of commuters. It was Elon Musk, the tech mogul who had made his mark on the world with companies like Tesla and SpaceX. He wasn't just any celebrity, he was a lightning rod for controversy, a man whose name seemed to dominate headlines every time he spoke or took action. Whether it was his groundbreaking innovations, his ambitious visions for the future, or his often polarizing opinions, Musk was always a figure that sparked intense reactions. As he walked through the terminal, his presence seemed to command attention. People subtly turned their heads, trying to figure out if it really was him. Musk, dressed casually in a black jacket, jeans, and sneakers, didn't look like someone who would stand out. But what caught everyone's eye was the red MAGA hat sitting on his head. The bright white letters spelling out, "Make America Great Again," stood out sharply against the backdrop of the busy terminal. The MAGA hat had become a symbol of division and controversy ever since it was first introduced during Donald Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. To some, it represented patriotism and a desire for change, a rallying cry for those who supported Trump's vision for the country. To others, it was a symbol of racism, bigotry, and exclusion, an emblem of the divisiveness that had taken root in American politics. Elon Musk, though known for his futuristic dreams of colonizing Mars and revolutionizing electric cars, had always marched to the beat of his own drum. His rebellious nature, sometimes seen as a strength and at other times a weakness, was reflected in his choice to wear the MAGA hat. For Musk, it wasn't just a political statement. It was a defiant symbol of his belief in free speech, in shaking up the status quo, and in doing what others might find controversial. But today, as he strode through the airport, the hat seemed to attract more than just the usual attention. It felt like a ticking time bomb, one that could spark a conflict in this crowded airport, where tensions over race, politics, and identity simmered just below the surface. Elon Musk walked confidently through the security line, his footsteps echoing slightly against the polished marble floor. The noise of the bustling airport seemed to fade into the background as he made his way to the metal detectors, his black jacket slightly swaying with each stride. His MAGA hat, perched atop his head, stood out against the dull gray of the terminal. The bright red color and bold white lettering on the hat seemed to invite stares, and sure enough, it wasn't long before people began to notice. At first, it was subtle, a quick glance from one traveler to the next, a whisper here and there. But as Musk approached the security checkpoint, the reactions became more overt. One young woman, her eyes wide, nudged her friend and pointed discreetly at the hat. A group of teenagers standing nearby exchanged glances and muttered under their breath, unsure of how to process the sight of a billionaire tech mogul wearing such a controversial symbol in a public space. The scene could have passed unnoticed in any other airport, but this was LAX, a place where celebrities and ordinary travelers often crossed paths. And when a man like Elon Musk, one of the most polarizing figures in the world, walked through wearing a MAGA hat, it was bound to attract attention. Among the security personnel, Officer John Matthews, a strict middle-aged man known for his no-nonsense approach to his job, noticed the hat immediately. Matthews was the kind of officer who prided himself on upholding the rules, no exceptions. His uniform was impeccable, his demeanor stern, and his approach to his duties precise. But the sight of the MAGA hat made him pause for a moment, his sharp eyes narrowing. He didn't like what it represented, nor did he think it belonged in this setting. His body language was subtle but telling. His jaw clenched slightly, His back stiffened, and he subtly adjusted his stance, making sure to keep his distance from Musk. Matthews was an experienced officer who had dealt with all sorts of situations over the years, but something about this encounter felt different. There was tension in the air now, and he could feel it. The discomfort was palpable, not just his own, but from the people around him who were starting to take note of the confrontation about to unfold. As Musk approached the security checkpoint, Matthews stepped forward, his voice firm but polite. "Excuse me, sir. I'll need you to remove your hat before you go through the metal detector," he said, his eyes locking onto the MAGA logo. Musk raised an eyebrow, but his expression remained calm. He'd been in enough public confrontations to know how to handle himself. "I'm just a traveler, same as everyone else." "Why do I need to remove my hat?" Musk asked, his voice low but steady. Matthews shifted his weight, his arms crossing over his chest. "It's the policy, sir. No political symbols allowed in the airport," he replied, keeping his tone neutral, though there was an edge to it. "If you want to proceed through security, you'll need to take the hat off." For a moment, Musk just stood there, his gaze steady. He could feel the eyes of the people around him, the tension building with each passing second. He wasn't a man who liked to be told what to do, especially not when it came to something as simple as wearing a hat. But he knew that arguing too hard could escalate things quickly, and he wasn't here to make waves. "I'm not trying to make a political statement," Musk said, offering a small shrug. "I'm just here to catch a flight like everyone else. This is just a hat, it's not hurting anyone." But Matthews wasn't backing down. He had a job to do, and his stance on the airport's policies was clear. "It's not about hurting anyone, sir. It's about following the rules," he insisted, his voice growing more firm. "We can't allow political symbols, especially ones that might cause a disturbance." Musk felt his temper flare ever so slightly. He wasn't used to being treated this way, especially not in a place like an airport where he should have been just another passenger. "Look," he said, his tone now a little more pointed. "I understand the policy, but taking my hat off isn't going to change anything. I'm just trying to go about my day." The tension between them was now thick enough to cut with a knife. The quiet murmurings from the surrounding passengers had become louder as more and more people began to pay attention. Some watched in silence, others pulled out their phones, likely to record the scene, knowing it would become the next viral moment. There was something inherently dramatic about a tech billionaire, known for his boldness and defiance, facing off with a no-nonsense security officer over a red MAGA hat. As the conversation dragged on, the situation only seemed to escalate. Musk's calm demeanor remained, but it was clear he wasn't about to back down. Matthews, on the other hand, stood his ground, insisting that the airport's rules were in place for a reason. By now, several other security officers had gathered around, their eyes scanning the situation. Some seemed uncertain about how to proceed, unsure whether they should get involved or if it was a matter for Matthews to handle alone. The air in the terminal felt charged with an odd energy, like the calm before a storm. Passengers on both sides of the security line watched in silence, some exchanging looks, others nervously shifting their weight from one foot to the other. Musk's decision to wear the MAGA hat had already become more than just a fashion choice. It had become a flashpoint, an emblem of political and social division, and as more security officers approached, the scene seemed poised to erupt into something far bigger than a simple misunderstanding over an airport policy. A quiet murmur began to ripple through the crowd, growing louder with each passing moment. Some passengers whispered to each other, commenting on Musk's defiance, while others shot disapproving glances at the security officers. It was clear that many of them were waiting for something, anything, to break the tension. What was going to happen next? Would Musk remove the hat? Or was this about to turn into something far more significant? A confrontation that might explode in front of hundreds of onlookers. The suspense in the air was almost unbearable now. The cameras on the phones clicked, and the entire terminal seemed to hold its breath. As the confrontation between Elon Musk and Officer Matthews continued, the tension in the air thickened and the scene began to attract more attention. What had started as a minor dispute over a hat had quickly evolved into a spectacle, one that would soon be the center of a public storm. The murmurs of curious onlookers grew louder, and soon, people began to gather in clusters, pulling out their phones and recording the scene. Musk stood there, his calm demeanor now mingled with the unmistakable buzz of anticipation from the growing crowd. Some passengers seemed unsure of what was happening, their faces a mixture of confusion and curiosity. Others, however, seemed to recognize the significance of the moment, their eyes glued to the exchange, eager to witness how it would unfold. A young man in the crowd, wearing a t-shirt with the slogan, "Fight for Freedom," raised his phone and began to film. His finger hovered over the record button, ready to capture whatever happened next. Nearby, a woman in her mid-30s whispered to a friend, her eyes fixed on Musk. "This is going to be everywhere," she said, her voice barely audible over the noise of the terminal. The videos began circulating almost immediately. Within minutes, the hashtag number Musk versus MAGA was trending on Twitter, and on Instagram, the footage was being reshared by millions. Some people defended Musk, praising his right to wear the hat and questioning the overreach of the airport's policies. "It's just a hat," one tweet read. "This is America. Why are we punishing people for their beliefs?" Others, however, supported Officer Matthews. "He's just doing his job," one user wrote. "No one should be allowed to push political agendas in public spaces like this." The debate quickly escalated, with passionate arguments on both sides. Musk's hat had become more than just an article of clothing. It had become a symbol, a flashpoint for deep political and cultural divisions. As the story began to gain momentum online, the reactions from the public grew more polarized. On one side, there were people who criticized the security officers for being too rigid, accusing them of profiling Musk based on the hat's political connotations. Many saw the confrontation as an attack on free speech, with some pointing out that the airport had allowed other forms of political expression in the past without issue. For these supporters, Musk wasn't just fighting for the right to wear a hat. He was standing up for the very principle of free expression in an increasingly divided world. On the other side, however, were those who felt that Musk's defiance was a provocation. To them, the MAGA hat symbolized hate and division. They believed that wearing the hat in a public place like an airport was irresponsible, especially in a time when tensions surrounding race, politics, and identity were at an all-time high. "He's just looking for trouble," one user commented. "Why provoke people like that? It's not the place." Musk, still standing at the security checkpoint, was acutely aware of the growing crowd and the swirling storm outside the airport. His phone buzzed in his pocket with notifications, the screen lighting up with a flood of tweets, posts, and messages. It felt as if the entire world was watching him. The situation had quickly spiraled beyond just a disagreement with a security officer. He had become the center of an emotional and political battleground. But as the media frenzy unfolded around him, Musk's mind began to race. He'd been through similar controversies before, but this felt different. This wasn't just about a tweet or an offhand comment. It was about something tangible. A symbol. The MAGA hat, for better or worse, was a lightning rod, and he had chosen to wear it. Musk's mind flashed back to previous encounters where his outspokenness had earned him both admiration and scorn. There were countless moments in his career when his rebellious nature had clashed with the expectations of society. Whether it was his controversial statements about Tesla's future or his decision to take on the establishment, Musk had always been willing to speak his mind. But this situation felt more complicated. On one hand, Musk believed deeply in standing his ground. He prided himself on being a disruptor, a man who challenged norms and expectations. In his mind, this wasn't about the hat. It was about freedom of expression, about being able to say or wear whatever he wanted without fear of backlash. After all, he had earned the right to do so. He was Elon Musk, the man who sent rockets into space, the man who had changed the automotive industry forever. He wasn't just some celebrity, he was a force of nature. But then, a sense of doubt crept into his thoughts. The weight of the situation was heavier than he expected. As a public figure, every move he made was under intense scrutiny. If he stood his ground now, he risked alienating millions of people who didn't agree with his choice of hat. Would they see him as a champion for free speech, or as someone who was deliberately stoking division? The media would have a field day, dissecting every word he said, every action he took. More than anything, Musk didn't want to be the cause of further polarization. He had long prided himself on the idea of innovation, of bringing people together, of focusing on a shared future, whether it was on Earth or Mars. Yet, this moment felt like it was pulling him in the opposite direction. Was it worth it to fight for something so seemingly trivial, especially if it meant escalating the tensions that already gripped the country? As Musk stood there, the sound of the crowd's whispers in his ear, the cameras flashing, and the tension in the air, he felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. It wasn't just about the hat anymore. It was about a choice, one that would affect how the world saw him. Did he back down to avoid more conflict? Or did he hold his ground, knowing full well that this moment would be talked about for days, weeks, maybe even years to come? Musk could feel the eyes of the world on him. In that moment, he wasn't just making a decision about a hat. He was making a decision about who he wanted to be, about the legacy he would leave behind. Would he be the man who caved to the pressure, or the man who stayed true to his convictions? The choice, for better or worse, was his to make. The growing crowd around Elon Musk seemed to intensify as the confrontation escalated. Officer Matthews, his voice now tinged with authority, stepped forward and addressed Musk firmly. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside for further questioning," he said, his tone a sharp contrast to the earlier attempt at diplomacy. Musk's eyes flickered briefly toward the security checkpoint, then back at Matthews. This was no longer just about a hat. It was about something much deeper, something personal. He had been a target of criticism his entire career, whether for his bold statements, his approach to business, or his political leanings. But this felt different. It felt like a trap, a test of his beliefs and principles. Musk had always prided himself on being fearless. He had survived media storms before, weathered the criticism that came with being a disruptor in every sense of the word. But this was more than just media attention. This was real life. This was public perception. And in this moment, that perception seemed to be leaning towards judgment. He stood still for a moment, weighing his options. He could easily remove the hat, diffuse the situation, and move on with his day. But something inside him, something stronger than the pressure to just comply, urged him to stand his ground. Musk had always been the one to challenge the system, to confront the status quo, and he couldn't let this moment pass without doing just that. "Why are you singling me out?" Musk's voice was calm but firm, his eyes locking with Officer Matthews. "Is it because of my political beliefs? Because of my hat?" His question hung in the air, and for a brief moment, everything around them seemed to pause. The bustling terminal, the murmuring crowd, the clicking of phone cameras, all of it faded into the background as Musk's question reverberated through the tense atmosphere. Officer Matthews didn't answer immediately. Instead, his posture stiffened. There was an uncomfortable silence broken only by the shuffle of shoes on the floor and the distant hum of the airport. He had been put on the defensive. Musk had asked the question that many people, perhaps even Matthews himself, had been avoiding. Why was this a big deal? Why did the hat matter so much? Was this really about the rules? Or was there something more beneath the surface? The officer's eyes flickered briefly, and then his voice came out more gruffly than before. "It's not just about the hat, Musk. It's what it represents. Your support of harmful ideologies, the way it promotes division." His words trailed off, and he cleared his throat. But it was too late. The damage had been done. The crowd, which had been silently observing, now began to murmur, voices rising with each passing second. Some passengers, their faces sympathetic to Musk, began to speak up. "Don't let him tell you what to do," a man shouted from the back. "It's just a hat. What happened to freedom?" Others, however, were quick to defend Matthews. "He's right," a woman called out from the side. "We don't need that kind of hate here." The debate was now in full swing, with passengers forming two clear factions. The once neutral onlookers had become vocal participants, either supporting Musk's right to wear whatever he wanted, or condemning the hat as a symbol of racism and division. The confrontation had become a public spectacle, one that was rapidly spiraling out of control. The situation was no longer just about an airport security policy. It had become about the very heart of what it meant to express an opinion in a public space, in a world where every action could ignite a firestorm. Musk's heart pounded as he took in the divided crowd. He had always been an outsider, someone who lived by his own rules, someone who built rockets and electric cars while others doubted him. But in this moment he felt the sting of public judgment more than ever. There was no hiding from it, no escape from the way people were beginning to view him. "Is this what we've come to?" he thought, the weight of it all pressing down on him. A world where wearing a hat could make you a villain? As the situation became more volatile, Musk felt a deep pang of vulnerability. For the first time, he was no longer in control. The world he had built, the empire of ideas and innovation, suddenly seemed so distant. In this moment, he was just a man in an airport, surrounded by a crowd of strangers who had already made up their minds about him. It wasn't just the hat that was being judged now. It was him, his choices, his voice, his very identity. The weight of the pressure was suffocating, but he forced himself to remain composed. His hands clenched by his sides, and he took a slow, deliberate breath. And then, unexpectedly, Musk's gaze shifted. He looked around at the faces of the crowd. Some were angry, their eyes filled with disdain. Others seemed confused, unsure of which side to take. But there were a few, just a few, who looked at him with empathy, with understanding. Their eyes were tired, as if they had seen this kind of conflict before. The struggle of being judged for your beliefs, for simply existing in a world that wanted to place labels on everything. Musk's mind flashed back to his early days at PayPal, to the years of struggle and ridicule he faced when he tried to push his vision forward. The tech world had laughed at him then, dismissing him as an eccentric, but he had proven them wrong, over and over again. Yet here he was now, facing something far more personal. This wasn't a challenge from the system. It was a challenge from society itself. The very people he had worked so hard to bring together were now standing apart, divided by an ideological war. He could feel the emotional toll of the moment building inside him, threatening to overflow. Racism, political division, prejudices. They were all crashing into his life at once, and he felt the weight of those labels pressing down on him. In that raw, vulnerable moment, Musk's eyes met the gaze of a young woman in the crowd. She was holding her phone, but her expression was different from the others. There was a quiet sadness in her eyes. For a split second, their eyes locked, and Musk could almost hear her silent words. "I get it," she seemed to say, her eyes full of understanding. The officer's voice cut through his thoughts, but this time, it didn't matter. Musk realized something. He didn't need to justify his actions to anyone. He had always believed that people should be able to make their own choices, to wear what they wanted, to express themselves in ways that felt true to them. He wasn't here to be anyone's hero, but maybe, just maybe, standing his ground in this moment would show the world something important. With a final glance at the crowd, Musk spoke, his voice steady but quieter now. "I'm not here to argue. I just want to catch my flight. But don't mistake my silence for agreement. We've got bigger issues than a hat." And with that, he took a step back, his gaze shifting to the security officers surrounding him. His internal battle had been fought, and for the first time in a long while, Musk allowed himself to simply be. The crowd, still buzzing with heated opinions, watched as the storm began to settle. Whether they understood his reasoning or not, one thing was clear. The moment had left a mark on everyone. The moment the news of Elon Musk's airport confrontation broke, it was like a lightning bolt hitting a powder keg. Social media exploded, and news outlets scrambled to report every angle of the story. The headlines screamed across screens everywhere. Elon Musk confronts airport security over MAGA hat, public confrontation catches fire. Opinions began flooding in, and the internet quickly divided into factions. On Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, memes circulated. Some mocking Musk for what they saw as a privileged man trying to play the victim, while others stood firmly behind him, praising his resolve. News networks followed suit, each reporting the event with their own slant. For some, Musk was the champion of free speech, standing up for his right to express himself, despite the personal and political risks. For others, he was seen as a man stubbornly pushing a divisive symbol on others, refusing to acknowledge the deeper meaning the MAGA hat held for many. As the story unfolded, the world seemed to react in extremes. There were threads of support, voices arguing that Musk was simply defending his personal rights, his right to wear whatever he chose, and his right to not be silenced by political correctness. "It's just a hat," some said. "Why make a big deal about it?" But there were others, a significant number, who criticized Musk for choosing to wear the hat in the first place. They argued that symbols like the MAGA hat represented more than just a political statement. They symbolized exclusion, racism, and division. In their eyes, Musk wasn't simply a victim of overreach. He was a conscious advocate for a deeply polarizing ideology, one that left many feeling unsafe and marginalized. The internet exploded with debates, some veering into heated arguments, some into outright outrage. However, it was the middle ground that began to catch the most attention. Those who expressed deep concern about the personal toll that these types of confrontations had on both parties. People from all walks of life weighed in. Some defended Musk, explaining that wearing the hat was his personal choice, while others expressed a desire for understanding, urging both sides to see things from the other perspective. It wasn't just social media users who were weighing in. The controversy caught the attention of politicians, influencers, and other public figures who often stayed out of the limelight. Some were quick to rally behind Musk, citing free speech as an essential tenet of democracy. Meanwhile, others in more politically active circles questioned his motivations, arguing that the real issue was not the hat, but what it represented in terms of divisive rhetoric and culture. Musk, now at the center of a viral storm, decided it was time to speak out. In a rare moment of vulnerability and reflection, he took to his social media platforms to address the incident directly. His post was not filled with the usual bravado or defiance that often defined his public persona. Instead, he wrote something that felt both personal and poignant, a message that transcended the political noise that had engulfed the situation. "I never expected this to escalate in the way it has. What started as a simple act of wearing a hat has turned into something much larger, something that is now beyond my control," Musk began. "I realize that in this world, symbols can hold immense power. We live in a time where the smallest act can be magnified, scrutinized, and twisted into something it was never meant to be. But I want to make something clear. It's not about the hat. It's about respect. The kind of respect that everyone deserves, regardless of their beliefs or background." He continued, acknowledging the officer's actions, but also pointing to the importance of understanding and respecting each other in a divided world. We all carry our own biases, and while I may disagree with the way things were handled, I believe it's time to reflect on how we all contribute to the divisions around us. We cannot continue to let politics define our interactions. This moment made me realize that we all have room for growth. Musk ended the post with a call to action. Rather than tear each other apart over labels, we need to start talking, to really listen to each other and understand where the other person is coming from. That's the only way we will ever begin to heal. The post went viral almost instantly. Comments flooded in from all corners of the world, ranging from praise to criticism. Some hailed his words as an act of courage, while others accused him of trying to spin the narrative in his favor. But one thing was certain: the story had shifted. No longer was it just about Musk and his MAGA hat. It had become about something bigger: understanding, respect, and the complicated ways in which personal expression intersects with public responsibility. But the story didn't end there. The officer involved in the incident, Officer Matthews, who had been thrust into the spotlight in a way he never anticipated, found himself facing his own internal turmoil. As the media continued to churn the story, Matthews began to reflect on his actions. He had acted quickly, perhaps too quickly, and had allowed his own biases to influence his decisions. It was clear to him now that the situation had spiraled out of control, and he felt deeply conflicted. In an unexpected turn of events, Officer Matthews released a statement of his own, a public apology. It wasn't long or flashy, but the sincerity in his words was palpable. "I want to take a moment to apologize for how things unfolded the other day at the airport. Looking back, I realized that my actions were driven by my own biases, and I could have handled the situation with more understanding. I know I can do better, and I hope this serves as a reminder that we all need to check our prejudices at the door and approach each other with respect." The apology made headlines, and while it wasn't the kind of sweeping, dramatic resolution some might have hoped for, it sent ripples through the media. It was an acknowledgement, an admission of fallibility that resonated with many. It reminded people that we are all human, that mistakes happen, and that the real work begins when we are willing to face those mistakes and learn from them. As the dust settled, the incident evolved into a broader conversation. People began to discuss the ways in which race, politics, and public figures intersect in ways that are often uncomfortable and difficult to navigate. What had started as an isolated confrontation in an airport had now sparked a global discussion about the nature of discrimination, privilege, and the challenges of being a public figure in a deeply divided society. For Musk, the entire ordeal had been an emotional roller coaster, but in the end, it had also been a catalyst for growth, not just for him, but for society at large. He had been forced to confront his own biases, to question the power of symbolism, and to recognize the weight of his influence. And while the world continued to debate the issue, one thing was clear: the conversation had begun, and perhaps that was the most important thing of all. As for Officer Matthews, his apology was a small but significant step toward healing, a reminder that even the most controversial incidents can lead to introspection, and that understanding is always a journey, not a destination. The tension, the anger, the conflict, it hadn't gone away. But there was now a glimmer of hope that, perhaps this time, things could change. After the dust had settled and the frenzy of opinions began to quiet down, Elon Musk found himself alone, reflecting deeply on the incident that had unfolded at the airport. The clash, initially triggered by a simple choice of clothing, had become a turning point, not just for the world, but for Musk himself. As he sat in his office, away from the prying eyes of the media and the social media storm that followed, he felt the weight of everything that had happened sink in. He had always been known for his rebellious nature, for challenging the status quo and doing things his own way. Wearing the MAGA hat had been an expression of that. For Musk, it was about defying the mainstream narrative, about standing up for his right to express his personal beliefs. even if they were controversial. But the incident had taught him a lesson he hadn't expected. Freedom of expression comes with responsibility, a responsibility that extends beyond his own views to how those views affect others. As he thought back to the confrontation, Musk acknowledged the symbolism that the MAGA hat carried for many people. To him, it had never been about hate or division. It had been a statement, perhaps reckless and misunderstood, but a statement nonetheless. Yet he now understood that the hat represented much more to others, a symbol of exclusion, anger, and political division. It wasn't just about the hat, but the deeper emotional reactions it evoked in people who saw it as a symbol of the very things they feared or hated. He had never intended to fuel division, but in that moment, he had. The reality hit him hard. Actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences are far bigger than what we initially see. He had always been someone who prided himself on being a disruptor, someone who created change. But in this case, the change was not the kind he had intended. The lesson was clear. What we say, what we wear, and what we represent, especially as public figures, can have far-reaching effects. For the first time, Musk considered the role of his influence in a different light. He had built companies that changed the world, built a reputation that had made him one of the most recognized people on the planet. But with that fame came power. Power to influence, power to divide, and power to shape public opinion. It was a responsibility he had never fully considered until now. The incident at the airport had forced him to confront his influence in a way that nothing else had. In a heartfelt statement released through his social media accounts, Musk shared his reflections with his followers and the public. "I've always believed in standing up for what I believe in, even when it's uncomfortable. But I've also come to understand that my actions have consequences, especially as a public figure. I wore that hat because I felt it was a symbol of free speech, but I never intended for it to create so much hurt. I now see how it has affected people in ways I never understood. I'll be more mindful of the power my actions hold and the impact they can have on those around me." This statement, much like the earlier one, sparked reactions across the globe. Some were touched by his honesty and willingness to reflect. Others remained skeptical, believing that Musk was only backtracking because of the public backlash. Still, the statement marked a shift, a more thoughtful, reflective Musk, willing to admit when he was wrong. The public's reaction, though divided, began to evolve. Some people who had initially supported Musk began to express doubt, questioning whether his actions had been fully respectful, even if they were his right. The conversation about freedom of expression, symbols, and personal responsibility gained momentum. People began to discuss the unintended consequences of political symbols in a society that was becoming increasingly polarized. The incident also sparked broader societal conversations about racism and how symbols, even innocently worn, could become charged with meaning. News outlets published articles about the symbolism of the MAGA hat, exploring its impact on different groups of people, especially those who had felt marginalized by the rhetoric associated with it. Social media debates continued, but they became more nuanced. There was less judgment and more discussion about the deeper issues that underpinned the incident. How do symbols affect our perceptions of each other? What responsibility do public figures have in choosing the symbols they wear? How do we reconcile freedom of speech with the need for respect and understanding? Musk, who had often faced criticism for his blunt approach to public life, now found himself at the center of a more reflective conversation about politics, race, and the responsibility of public figures. He had long been a proponent of free speech and challenging conventional wisdom, but he was now seeing firsthand how those ideals collided with the reality of a society that was struggling to understand each other. His stance had forced a critical reflection, not just on his own actions, but on the larger societal challenges surrounding race, politics, and how we choose to express ourselves. For Musk, this incident had turned into a learning experience. While his past choices had often been about making bold statements, this time he had learned the hard way that not everything is about making a statement. Some things, like respect for others' perspectives, were far more important. In the weeks following the incident, the conversation didn't die down. If anything, it only deepened. Discussions about race, symbols, and political beliefs took center stage in communities, in boardrooms, and in families across the world. The airport incident, which had initially seemed like a moment of tension and division, had become a teaching moment, a catalyst for broader, more meaningful dialogue. Through this experience, Musk learned that public figures, especially those as influential as him, are not just representatives of their own beliefs, but of the society they help shape. He had been forced to grow, not just as an entrepreneur, but as a person. He realized that while he would always be a disruptor, sometimes the real disruption came from understanding and change within. And so, with a quiet, hard-earned wisdom, Musk moved forward, mindful of his influence, his responsibility, and the power of the symbols we all carry. His reflection became a subtle shift in his approach to the world. The incident at the airport had been a wake-up call, one that taught him a crucial lesson. In a divided world, we must be mindful of the impact our actions have on others, for the road to change is often paved with understanding, not division. As the days passed and the storm of opinions gradually settled, Elon Musk took a moment to reflect on the lessons he had learned. In the wake of the airport incident, he realized something profound. While the world may be divided on many issues, understanding and empathy could be the bridge that brought people together. In his final message to the public, Musk shared a note of unity, urging everyone to move beyond their differences and engage in meaningful conversations. We all come from different backgrounds, hold different beliefs, and see the world through different lenses. But at the core, we are all human. Our differences should not divide us, but rather, they should give us the opportunity to learn from one another, he wrote. He acknowledged that confronting biases, both our own and those we encounter in others, is never easy. It requires patience, courage, and above all, respect. Musk called for open conversations, where people could share their thoughts without fear of judgment, where differences could be addressed with understanding rather than anger. He stressed that the key to overcoming division was not to avoid difficult topics, but to face them head-on, with compassion and a willingness to listen. The incident had shown him how small actions, even seemingly insignificant ones like wearing a hat, could stir emotions and trigger larger conversations. Musk now believed that, while it was important to stand firm in one's beliefs, it was just as crucial to be mindful of the impact those beliefs have on others. True strength lies not in standing alone, but in lifting others with us, whether through words, actions, or empathy. As the public continued to debate and reflect, Musk's experience sparked a movement for change. People, inspired by his journey, began to reassess their own behaviors, opening their hearts to more inclusive, respectful ways of interacting. The idea that even small actions can make a big difference became a rallying cry. Musk's story reminded people that the world is shaped not just by grand gestures, but by everyday moments of understanding, where even the smallest act of kindness or awareness can ripple outward and create lasting change. In the end, the story of the MAGA hat at the airport was no longer just about political symbols. It became a catalyst for a larger movement of unity, where respect and dialogue became the true symbols of progress. Musk's journey was a reminder that, no matter how controversial or difficult the situation, there is always room for growth, learning, and change.